Hello, everybody. Welcome to Deconstructing Ownership, Dismantling Colonialist Notions of Private Property. We would like to begin by acknowledging that many of the people joining the call today are living on the unceded territory of indigenous nations. Us at Talking Rivers are speaking from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee people, specifically the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk Nation. In addition, those of us who are part of this colonial society acknowledge our role as settlers on this territory, honoring those who have lived in harmony with this land since time immemorial. And for this event, we would also like to thank land, the tapestry of communities that bring life and nourish us all.
My name is Sinsun Aguilar-Izzo.
And I'm Blake Lavia.
And we're part of Talking Rivers, an organization that unites communities through art, science, and conversation to honor the rights of the modern human world. This program was funded in part by Humanities New York with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities.
In discussing the concept of ownership, private property, and our relationship with land, I want to introduce tonight's speakers. Marina Johnson-Zafiris, Mohawk Wolf Clan, is an organizer, activist, scholar, and a PhD student at Cornell University. She focuses on technological interventions for socio-environmental justice and critical data information studies across Haudenosaunee territory. And Cassandra Ferreira is the co-founder of the Center for the Ethical Land Transition. Through the work of ethical land transitions, Cassandra transforms conventional real estate practices in service to land, cultural reunion, and reparative justice. Fernanda Sanchez Jaramillo, unfortunately, tonight is in Colombia where she lives, there is bad weather and she doesn't have internet, so she couldn't join us, unfortunately.
And before we begin the discussion, I would like to invite the audience to drop the questions in the chat function, which you can find in the right-hand corner of your screens. We'll be asking the questions at the very end of the event. And again, very sorry that Fernanda is not with us tonight, but we're really excited to engage in this conversation with you all. And to begin, we will want to discuss and talk about land in relationship to us humans, our personal connection to land. So I'm going to turn the word over to our speakers tonight. What does land mean to you? Can you describe your relationship with land? And I'll pass the word first to Marina.
Sego Grego. Hello, everyone. First, thank you so much to Talking Rivers, Nyawa, for hosting us and for starting this discussion. Deowanahawi Yungyats. My Mohawk name is Deowanahawi. My English name is Marina Wagatahuni. I'm Wolf Clan of the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk Nation. I'm here in Akwesasne territory, so a little bit north of Potsdam, New York, where I believe Talking Rivers is. And what does land mean to me? So for about 15 years or so of my life, I actually grew up outside of my homelands in Texas. So in this process of kind of like coming home and reconnecting with the land, I've spent a lot of time observing and listening and trying to learn from the natural world and from the people around me that I've spent more time here. And all these observations that I have kind of inform the decisions I make, especially like what I invest my time and energy in researching. And a lot of these moments, learning and listening, I realized that a lot of my family, a lot of my friends, a lot of the people that surround me in community are sick. their health has been compromised because of the pollution and industrialization that has occurred surrounding Akwesasne. And I think that it shows that our bodies are extensions of the land and vice versa. And so if that's the case, we have to do everything in our power to fight for its right to restore itself. And usually that means I find myself in a place of challenging large corporations, questioning them, which we can discuss more later. But yeah, I guess that's a blip. I'll pass it over to the next panelist.
Hello, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for hosting, and such an honor to be here with you, Marina. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. My name's Cassandra Lynn, and I am in the homelands of the Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo peoples in currently Northern California. And I have been living here for the last 22 years. My bloodlines are mixed European migrations, settlers from many generations over time. And so land is has become such an important orienting force in my life because what came into this world in a very disoriented place and in a disoriented context, disconnected from lineage, disconnected from land. And that was not well. That was very, very much a, not good for my body or my soul. And so I've been very blessed in life to be able to journey deeper into listening to land, being in relationship with land, and being guided into what I consider the belly of the beast, which is the capitalization, the extension of colonialism in the form of the capitalization of land and in the practice of real estate. And so 20 years ago, I was guided into that practice, and I am very grateful that I did that, even though it's been very hard to participate in such a system that objectifies land so intensely, and by extension objectifies people and life, and upholds our disconnection from each other. And land is transitioning, and land transitions from people to other people and from one legal form to another. And it's been very beautiful through the work of the Center for Ethical Land Transition to be able to bring a justice-oriented focus, a reparative focus to land transitions, and to bridge the current system that we're in that transacts land now into land transitions that actually hopefully can help heal the past, the present, and the future. And in that way, land is my boss, land is my guide, land is to whom I am accountable. The personal, the spiritual, and the vocational journey are all very woven together for me with land at center.
Thank you. Thank you both for introducing us into this space, introducing yourselves, but also the land that you're all in relationship with. And so now I'm going to turn this next question to Marina. How is the Ganingahaga Mohawk Nation of Akwesasne navigating the legacies of land theft while dealing with the renewed efforts of colonization?
Yeah, I just want to preface first that I do not speak for the nation or for any groups of people. For that matter, I'm an individual, and I'm merely speaking from personal experience. So there's tremendous efforts from so many individuals, so many groups of peoples, from collectives, from longhouse peoples. And what we're dealing with right now is an attempted threat to that with the present Akwesasne Mohawk land claim settlement. When Indigenous governments attempt to kind of address land theft in the United States court system, it often does not go favorably. U.S. courts were created, under Article 3 of the Constitution, with the jurisdiction established by said Constitution and Congress. And these jurisdictions are incompatible and actually built to undermine what some called traditional frameworks of government. So a group of people here in Akwesasne started an effort to collect and disseminate and translate information regarding the current Akwesasne Mohawk land claim, in which two of the elected systems of government here in Akwesasne, the tribal elective system, as well as the elective system on the Canadian side, and the Mohawk Nation Council of Chiefs, which is one of the traditional governments here are a part of with New York State. And a part of the elements of the internal agreements in some of the memorandum of understandings of this settlement would essentially allow for use and occupancy deed provisions to be implemented and imposed onto the people of the Longhouse, which means that any land holdings that happen within this area of Akwesasne and its subsequent settlement zones would essentially mean that they would have to fall under the tribal government, which is a domestic dependent nation of the United States. So it's held in trust by the United States. And this is often how the Bureau of Indian Affairs interacts with a lot of nations. But the Ganyagahaga and the Longhouse people actively reject that system of land holdings. And so those are one of the very many concerns that are a part of the settlement agreement that we're presently trying to oppose and withdraw and not be a part of. And so that's kind of one of the current in the works happenings to deal with these renewed efforts of colonization, kind of reframed as an attempt at land back. But what does land back actually mean when it's held by the U.S. Government, this colonial regime? And so amidst that, we also have the ongoing kind of omnipresent force of industrialization that is happening in the North Country. We have this privatized land ownership by large corporations that are utilizing the subsidized electricity of the Moses Saunders, power dam. And so they set up shop, usually right next to the reservation, utilize this subsidized electricity to then produce, say, aluminum, like Alcoa Corporation is doing, or Reynolds, which is now decommissioned and a Superfund site. But we also see this kind of move towards this greenwashed effort of industrialization, which is what we're presently facing with this hydrogen fuel facility called Air Products and Chemicals, right on the confluence of the Grass River and the St. Lawrence River. And so there's a lot of community resistance to the active industrial growth, no matter how green it's painted as, on our traditional homelands. And we're trying to kind of challenge those modes of typical resource aggregation and reconnect with stewardship, the stewardship of the lands, the waters, the air, and how do we combat that within the space of, large corporate regimes.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. And I'm actually going to just ask a very quick follow-up question to everything that you just said. In this space in which you're confronting both past and present violence and harms and acts of colonization. How do you all, what is this, what tools are you using to organize in these spaces? What tools are you personally and others that you're collaborating with using to resist these acts of colonization, but also just to unite communities together?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So a lot of, in order to organize, you must first like inform. And a lot of that means usurping the tools that colonial institutions use. So a lot of that is data aggregation that happens through these regulatory departments such as the EPA or the DEC, and organizing and translating that information. So we use a lot of the ECHO EPA database to track kind of non-compliance history that happens within industry or with the land claims. We monitor the PACER court filing systems, and then we usually just get together, print it out, and go through line by line and translate that, and then utilize various forms of social media, like Facebook, for example, to disseminate that information. We have to always keep accessibility in mind, and how to share and reproduce easily in mind. And I don't think that necessarily means developing new platforms, but rather harnessing existing platforms to really amplify and echo people's voices, and allow folks to share and to comment and to challenge and contest. But yeah, a lot of Facebook Messenger, a lot of text chains, and sometimes even Signal. So yeah, those are some various tools we've been using so far.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that additional answer. Thank you, Marina. And now, in light of everything that Marina just shared, what comes to my mind is that these legacies of violence that we're all dealing with in our present and are being enforced on all of our own skin. And Cassandra, turning the word over to you, from the perspective of someone who has worked in the world of real estate, how do you think we can shift from this transactional nature of our relationship with land, but while we're working within the settler colonial system?
Thank you. It's really moving to hear more of your stories, Marina. So I'm looking forward to how we bring this together, but I will share about, in the conventional real estate, we've come to start to think of it like a highway that just everybody's kind of barreling down because it's the way. There's pre-printed contracts and organized ways of doing things that people often trust because it's the normative way. It's what's happening, and there's brokerages and associations and which are corporations, many of them that dominate that as an industry, and and so where we're working is often with the unrecognized tribes in California, and with other folks throughout the country, where we're providing real estate strategy and advice for both title holders and folks who are seeking reunion. And so one of the things that we do, as you can tell right there, is we're changing the language. And so there are people who, in one paradigm, own land and are selling land, but trying to bring light to the fact that they are currently title holders within a system that actually has, we could deeply question and do the legitimacy of, but nonetheless, they are holding title at this moment. And so we use that word as opposed to something, as opposed to other language. And then the folks who would be buying or coming into stewardship, we're using words like who are rematriating, who are in the seat of reunion, who are bringing land-based culture back to land. And so there's a way for us in our practice that we're continually relanguaging so that we can get off of that highway and onto the trail. And you need a lot of people who are willing to forge another way. And so, and that interest in forging another pathway comes from many different parts of the system. There are people who are title holders who are questioning their land legacy and who are looking at their responsibility and their accountability and educating themselves so that they can participate in a reparative land transition. There are people who are certainly in the seat of cultural reunion, Indigenous, Black, communities of color that are in cultural reunion with land, that are driving, that are activating these land transitions. And of course, with many times multiracial team support, solidarity support to navigate through that transactional framework in a more relationship-centric way. And so it takes continually reprogramming our thinking, often slowing down, because that highway is full of urgencies and often timelines that are driven by those who are in an entitled situation. And so there's a great need to slow the process down, to realize that in land transitions, land is bringing us together, and that it's not just a dualistic transition from one entity, the seller, to the buyer, and land, the object transitions, that there's a reframing that we're doing in which the title holders are themselves going through a repair process of coming into right relationship with land by relinquishing that title. And those in reunion obviously are coming into right relationship with the land through their process of rematriation or cultural reunion. And that we continue in the Center for Ethical Land Transition because we're off-roading, we're not on that highway, we're in the land, we need a compass. And so we continually work with how we orient and reorient, slow down, get into relationship, listen to land, allow this process to actually be one in which everyone transforms, and of course land transforms, because it's coming out of private ownership into Indigenous care, cooperative stewardship, rights of nature frameworks, other ways of being held that we also often call culturally affirmative. So the legal system needs to adapt and bend towards that process of cultural affirmation for how people's worldview and cosmology actually is with land, that is not on that freeway, just kind of pummeling us all over the edge. So.
Thank you. Thank you for your response, Cassandra. And I'm actually going to do another little small follow-up question. So you mentioned a little bit about the conception, well, a lot about the conception of what we consider property.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, in many minds around the world, and in my opinion, unfortunately, the conception of nature fits into that conception of property.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're going to shift away legally from this conception of nature as property and honor nature's personhood, how would that look, in your personal opinion? What are the mechanisms that you see to shift from the conception of nature as property, as a commodity, to honor nature's personhood?
Yes, well, we're involved in a project together that is exactly experimenting on and listening for models, because in the our legal system, and I would love to hear Marina's perspective on this, like it's such a rights-based framework. So people who have private property, like she described, can like come in and just extract value. And so, and not be accountable to land, water, community, other living creatures. And so this rights-based framework is an interesting one to turn on itself and say, okay, well then we're going to give rights to the forest, to the rivers, to the mountain, to this is being done worldwide now, but then one of the big challenges is then in that legal framework is we still need to form some kind of guardianship entity. We need some form of at least at this moment, we need some recognizable entity to hold that title. And so there's deep legal hacks underway right now to and through our work with CEDAR, the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights, there's really intelligent legal thinking to strip private property rights and through easement work to uphold the rights of nature, but then to create an entity that is an association of guardians. But then those guardians are humans, right? And so therein lies our challenge, because as humans have so much recovery to do in terms of how, and very differently, of course, there's many humans that have never lost the capacity to listen to the natural world, to not regard nature as nature over there, but to know that nature is their kin. And so it is those folks, those indigenous wisdom keepers that teach and hopefully will help the rest of us learn how to become guardians. And so in these legal models, where land, water, rivers, we're trying to come out of private property. You need people to stand in as guardians of water, guardian of forest, guardian of bees, guardian of birds, and so there's I think a really strong need for us to reconsider, what does it mean to sit in a stewardship council? What does it mean to be on the what would other people would, the board of a land trust? Who actually listens and knows how to listen and then be informed by and then speak on behalf of in a situation where you're trying to restore the sovereignty and sentience of land. It's going to require a lot of capacity building and listening and it's re-embodying a worldview, a kinship worldview. And of course, there's people who are leading the way with that. So I hope that kind of answered your question, Simpson.
Yes, and I'm going to actually follow up by posing, thank you, Cassandra, posing a similar question to Marina. If you'd like to maybe respond to what you've heard Cassandra say so far, with anything, but also specifically to that last question of if we legally shift away from the conception of nature as a commodity, how in this current society, within this current settler colonial frameworks and breaking out of them, of course, how do we honor nature's personhood?
Yeah, Cassandra, that was a great, I guess, thread or lines to follow, because when I think of rights, I immediately think under whom or under what, and if those rights are sanctioned or upheld by a settler colonial system, then they can easily be done away. So can we honestly expect the US government to be able to uphold rights for nature when its entire existence depended on the corruption of nature? And I will use nature loosely here, because at the time, Indigenous peoples were also considered a part of that concept of terra nullius, a part of nature. And so in my personal worldview, the land already has those rights. It already owns itself. This land and all the non-human inhabitants existed long before us and will continue to exist long after us. I think when we discuss the rights or the owning, the conceptualization of the land owning itself, we're actually asking, how do we properly convey and effectuate that ownership? And that's where Cassandra's notes about guardianship come up. And as it stands, the US and Canadian property world just doesn't have those avenues to effectively communicate that concept. Granted, there's some conceptualizations that kind of come close to this. We have the conventions of high seas that came to be around the 1958, where it was said that a lot of the oceans were not included in under sort of any sovereign or state. But even that was kind of undermined because certain exclusive economic zones have been developed for certain nations, undermining that notion of water liberty. So this is where I turn and say that if we're dedicated, if individuals are dedicated to the idea of rights and liberty, specifically liberty for elements of the natural world, for land, for trees, for waters, they have to do everything in their power to actually support and demand that settler colonial governments not interfere with Indigenous governments, because the undermining of Indigenous governments directly affects the liberty of the natural world. So we can counter this idea of ownership with the idea of liberty, which is actually protected under Haudenosaunee framings and understandings of the natural world. From what I've been taught and what I've learned so far, the Guyana-Goa, or the Great Law, which is the constitution of the Haudenosaunee, or the commonly known as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, clearly identifies the women of the clans of our nation to be the stewards and title holders of the soil of the land. But that title holder status is only there in order to protect it for the faces yet to come, or sometimes referred to as the future generations. And so only the women are kind of centered in correspondence with the men of the Confederacy for preserving that land. And that doesn't necessarily mean in context of conservation, like it should be isolated and left alone and we shouldn't touch it. And that comes from a lot of Western frameworks, but rather, how do we live in relationship to the land that doesn't center extraction and capital aggregation? And so before like major meetings and a lot of the festivals that we celebrate, we have the Ohondugali, which actually gives thanks to all the natural world that surrounds us, the people included, the land, the water, the plants, the animals, all the way up to the stars and the power of creation. And a lot of people see this as kind of like a spiritual thing, but I don't think of it that way. I think it's a political act. It's an assertion that every decision that we make and the consensus that we come to within our clan families must hold the natural world in mind. And so how do we potentially see affirmations like that as a foil to these common ideas of rights under like US and Canada, for example, which can easily be taken, relinquished, quit claimed. The minute a war starts, those rights can be taken. So those are some things I wanted to offer up.
I'm so grateful. Is it okay if I just respond? Because, you know, in the work, sometimes there's like deep in the rabbit hole of like hacking the system, right? You know, and like finding new pathways to liberate, you know, to try to unshackle and resituate like people in relationship and with each other and with land. And it's always such a, like, I get washed over with gratitude with the reminder of like, right, and there's so many people who do not see it that way, like at all. Like I've never lost the perception of that sacred relationship and like you said, political, because it's like, no, this is how it is for us, you know, and the way that that just helps us all shed light to how cosmology, like how our perspective is actually driving so much in our actions. Yeah, so really appreciate what you shared in that.
Well, really appreciate what you both shared. And now I'm going to kind of open it up with a question that can be for either, it is for both of you. And we're talking again about the historical roots of land ownership. So when discussing the correlation between historical roots of land ownership and our present environmental crisis, how do we see them connected, not connected? Is there a connection between the conception of private land ownership and environmental exploitation? And you both have kind of answered that in different ways throughout these last minutes. But if you would speak specifically about the connection between land ownership and our present environmental crisis. I'm actually going to turn it first over to Marie.
Yeah, I do want to start by kind of also acknowledging the discrepancies in what private land ownership means. Too, when we talk about scales of oppression, we also have to look at the hierarchies of capitalism and wealth. And so, you know, someone mom and pops owning, you know, a quarter acre of land is very different from ultra wealthy and elites aggregating land. And so I just want to acknowledge those separations of regimes of power. So yeah, I guess in terms of like centering climate or environmental crisis, land is also seen as zones of wasting. So the lands that are seen as unimportant or unlivable, which also happen to be in very close proximity to, you know, indigenous reservations, or where large indigenous or any minority group kind of lives, is seen often as like an area to be wasted. And so oftentimes industry, I believe that there was one study that said that over 75% of US Superfund sites are located near or on reservation lands, Indian reservation lands. And so I see kind of the history of settler colonial governing agencies that are supposed to be quote unquote stewarding or conserving these resources as bureaucratic entities that have these kind of treaty and industry agreements to allow them to operate in modes and fashions that allow for slow violence and kind of this form of unnoticeable contamination, and that exceeds, you know, borders, both reservation and county and international borders that may comply with the idea of property, but entities like the water and fish and the pollution itself does not adhere to. And so I can only speak here in Akwesasne, like for decades, our land and bodies have been kind of treated as these sacrifice zones. And they've actually attempted to dispossess the community via industrial degradation. And federal and state agencies have proven time and time again that they cannot attain like the goals of environmental well-being and sustainability that they set forth themselves, let alone the standards that we wish as simply as human beings, as Indigenous human beings, for them to comply with. And so when we think about ownership, when corporations set up shop, they think that as long as they are adhering to what those agencies set forth to them, they can do whatever they want. They can, attain, 300 million gallons of water per day from the St. Lawrence River in order to create hydrogen fuel. As much as they want because they're in compliance. Alcoa can, exceed compliance by 846% for aluminum discharge because they know that they will only get a slap on the wrist from these regulatory agencies. And so this idea of private land ownership also corresponds with private land degradation. We're going to exploit as much as we can until it doesn't serve us. And that comes from this commodification, this waste-based commodification relationship that we've entered into in late-stage capitalism. And so how do we challenge and hack at those roots is the question that I think we need to start posing, and how do we protect the people that go against and challenge those regimes. Sorry, I rambled right there.
Powerful ramble.
Not at all. Cassandra?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate where you started with that in terms of the distinction between the people who are just trying to actually survive through having a secure place to live and who are brought into that, like, that's the only way to have a home, and is to try to buy a home, and so I really do want to distinguish that from what is possible with the current privatization of land, where the wealthy can continue to acquire, and the wealth divide, that the system itself completely supports and allows for the dispossession of land of Native and Black communities and other communities of color, like the wealth divide. I think something like 98% of rural land is in the hands of white people. And even in urban environments, the percentage is very high as well. And so there's the system, and as Marina says, the regime supports and allows for that kind of massive wealth disparity and land access disparity. That means that the people who work the land, who care for the land, who understand how to listen and be in right relationship with land, don't have access to land and are at the effect of horrible economic situations as well, because in order to survive, they have to work for those who are exploiting the land and labor, which isn't that the root of this whole situation anyways? And so it just continues in different forms today. And like you said, late stage capitalism, here we are. And and I sometimes use the context of it's a crime scene. Like, we're like, if you take the blinders off and look, and especially, you think about what Marina is sharing about contamination. Something that's really strong where I live is the effects of climate change. And fire and floods do not obey private property lines. And so clearly, to care for climate disruption, how do you get all of these, individual private property owners to actually collaborate. And in some beautiful cases, they do come together because the threat of their own demise, brings them together. But in a lot of cases, you have people making each other very vulnerable because they own private land and they're not taking care of it. They're blocking, their practices block the flow of salmon. Their practices, don't care for the forests and burn in a way that's appropriate. And so fuel loads can build and make other places more vulnerable that actually are trying to take care of that. So private property's way of dividing and parceling places that actually by their nature, of course, are entirely interconnected, and our survival is in that web. So I think that there's so many ways that we can talk about how the private property system actually is connected to racialized climate disasters all over the place.
Well, thank you for that powerful finale, Cassandra. I just want to leave a space for Marina if you wanted to add it to any of that before turning on to the next question.
I guess just like an anecdotal attachment to what Cassandra has said, because that was excellent, is that if we look at just, for example, what some may call upstate New York, Adirondack region, we see that when we talk about private land ownership and these deeds, they're all fraudulent. They're all made up, quite literally, they are made up. And we have not only from the Haudenosaunee or Gonyak-Gahaga frameworks of understanding that we continue to hold that land and we've never ceded, relinquished, quit-claimed, extinguished any of that land, the 9 million plus acres of that land. It's actually reflected in like the US or settler colonial understandings of what has been correctly transferred title to. Both treaties that are used to undermine the traditional homelands of the Gonyak-Gahaga are both fraudulent, both in our frameworks and US frameworks. And so all the subsequent deeds that come after those treaties are also fraudulent. So getting property owners to understand that and to reflect upon that is a challenge. But then you also have federal and state governments that hold a lot of this land as like resource reserves. There's rare minerals in the Adirondack Park, and we're always in question about whether those will get tapped into, so to speak. And so we have yet to address these like fanciful documents, because these deeds are quite literally it's a broken line of deeds. They're fraudulent deeds. And so now we're just trying to address the long history of genocide until we are strong enough, and we have been strong enough, and there's histories of us kind of taking action to address that line of fraudulent land transaction that has occurred. So I just wanted to kind of story that as a piece onto what Cassandra has said.
Can I just really to talk about that as and I'm collecting more ways of thinking about it, and with you right now for sure, but legal fiction, like it's actually like it's fraudulent deeds, and interestingly they're insured by a fraudulent system that is a fiction, and so it's pretty intense. And then there's mortgages leveraged against a lot of those that keep people accountable to debt and keep people participating in economic cycles that keep them accountable to debt, which is also, generally making the wealth divide greater, and it eats up people's time and capacity to be accountable to land, or to repair, or to the peoples that are the other peoples in their communities. So I think this notion of accountability and the way the private mortgage debt industry is also really keyed into that and keeps that fraudulent system in place.
Yeah, and I think that, sorry, I think that debt also kind of disparages people from actually connecting then with the land that they are residing on. It prevents people from actually feeling as if the land that they are sitting on is not a commodity, because they're actively struggling to pay for it. It's a weight on their mind. And so I think that also then challenges the ability to create solidarity amongst low-income minority groups, because when we address land back, we're also then challenging normative structures of what success within the typical Western wealth structure is. So yeah, just
yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing to me how many people, pretty much everybody that we work with, even if they're coming from communities that have been, and especially they're coming from communities that have been displaced and deeply disadvantaged inside of the system, so many of the groups are leading the way to cooperative care, to mutual aid, to I don't need to just get this for me. We are doing this together for us, but then also for the future. And so it's amazing, and I just am humbled by it all the time. Like, oh my gosh, that which has been that Western goal of, what security and ownership is supposed to get you. Folks are, continually saying, no, we know that's broken. We got to do this together.
So if it's okay to move on to the next question, which is basically tying right into everything you've been saying, I wanted to basically shift in the direction that, Cassandra, you've just been pointing at, to ways in which people can work together and take steps, whether within the current legal system or outside of it, to create respectful and a just relationship with land. What can people do? And of course, people talking about people from different perspectives, whether it be from settler communities, indigenous communities, minority communities, people of color communities. What can people do? And I think you can answer from whatever perspective you would like, being as personal or as general as you would like as well. And I'm actually going to turn this over to Marina first.
what can we do? Well, I think first and foremost, it's all based within a local context. So if we want to counter the idea of settler colonial understandings of ownership, we have to become grassroots, because if the idea is aggregation and then we must turn first to the land that's surrounding us and that we're tied to, and the people that surround us, the indigenous communities that surround us, in order to challenge those notions. So I guess to give example, just within here and the framework that we know here, anytime there's a call to action to stop the rise of corporate and industrial growth, simply showing up, because the pollutions don't know racial bodies. They are poised in a way in order to attack certain groups of people. However, the pollution itself is contamination worldwide. It spreads through our waters, it spreads through the air, and it aggregates. So land back activists, anti-industrial activists, environmental justice activists from minority groups need to build lines of solidarity. We desperately need to build lines of solidarity because, for example, abolition, I think, has a lot to do with Indigenous land stewardship, and they have relationships and conversations that need to become activated and alive and breathe to life. I also just want to tell any Indigenous youth or Indigenous peoples in general that may be watching this to really spend the time and invest in your traditional governance structures and systems, and to invest in it so that it can flourish for the future generations and for the faces yet to come, because the elective systems are not the government we want to be participating in. US governments are the oppressive force, and we do not belong in that system, in my personal opinion. And so that is, it's mainly a call to action that we need to start surviving together, and we need to start challenging these typical modes of industrial growth and wealth aggregation together. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Cassandra, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm feeling somehow to answer, as a white settler, like specifically from the place, not as just a land justice real estate activist or, but just like really personally, I think that it's a body of work to kind of get like to take on the inquiries that would have us soften the places where we defend ourselves from each other. And there's these I think very polarized, like it's like a poison of consciousness that is in our minds that it can be very dualistic, and like, oh, well, land back means that, well, where are all the white people going to go, or what are, like this sort of either or thinking. And I think that reading, learning, listening, like, and for folks who have who have an entitlement because that regime has entitled your people, and it, like, we have a particular accountability to do that work for ourselves to get like spiritually strong enough to continually look at where we have unexamined entitlement, so that that doesn't stop us from recognizing that movements of liberation are not just for other people, that they're actually movements of liberation for all of us, and so that how you can find, each of us finds our own position, but not in a defended positional way, but actually in an aware, oh, I have a positionality inside of this system. And there are times when it's, like it's really powerful to get to be a white, middle-aged real estate agent, because I have access into certain conversations and certain rooms of people that I can go into, and I don't have to go in there throwing punches, but I can definitely go in there in solidarity. And I can go into those spaces knowing that I'm part of multiracial teams that are working together. And I just think that that's the most energizing and life affirming thing that I could be doing with my time. And I'm blessed. I know that not everybody has had the positionality that I have, but I'm also not a person of coming from inherited wealth. And so we, in the community that I live in, we're working, how do we design something that isn't just for us and our families to continue to hoard wealth just for ourselves? How do we create something of course, Marina's saying about locality and like regionality, being able to be in relationship with where you are, so that you can understand the stories and become part of that story, like become part of the story in a way that that is enlivening and connects each of us personally into right relationship with land. And so, yeah, I guess I feel like there's so much creativity and like that is yet to, it's already percolating so much, and so many movements have been carrying these torches for so many generations. And now is also a time, I think, for all of us to get creative and imagine a post-private property future. Like, so what will that look like? How will I live here and be an accountable and connected member of this community? And so like challenging our own imagination so that we can help, be part of creating that future from wherever we are, like in the exact place that we are.
Yes, I definitely want to echo what Cassandra said. It's so exciting to kind of take a moment to dream and to be in like a speculative space sometimes, and to have conversations like that are purely playful and fun and speculative, but perhaps can open lines for actualization, for future tools and methods and understandings and frameworks. And I did want to give a small plug to Research for the Front Lines, because I'm realizing that I know a lot of these spaces, there's a lot of academics, and so if you're an academic out there and you want to invest time and energy and resources in supporting frontline workers, frontline movements, I highly suggest connecting with Research for the Front Lines as a way of applying your knowledges and your tools for liberatory work. So yeah, just a quick plug.
Thank you both. Thank you both for delving into all of these questions and basing ourselves off everything that's been shared tonight, from the complexity of the problem to the flowering beauty of potential solutions, whether they be speculative or whether they be transformative. They're coming, and we're all here joining together, discussing. And in that same space, I would like to turn to a possibility that has been mentioned tonight, just to see both of your feelings about this one idea, this one concept, and that's what if land doesn't have a quote unquote owner? What if we shift into a place that land basically is the owner of themselves itself? And that could mean different things. It could mean ecosystems that don't have a human owner, but are themselves their own separate entity, probably with a system of guardians representing their interest, human guardians. So just turning over the mic to both of you to see again, should land own itself themselves? And what would that mean? And how could that happen? Turn over to Cassandra.
It's interesting. My mind is going into two places at once. I'm thinking about, the solutions on the front lines, those hacks that in which people associate with themselves as an unincorporated association, where people form a body that is not a corporate body, that is distinctly an association for the purpose of being guardians. And I would also add remembering, learning, listening, becoming guardians, learning what that is actually like and what culturally that would look like. And so I feel so excited about those iterations, those kind of hacks in this illegitimate system to try to embody what it is that that we're yearning for. And so my mind goes into those places, and then my mind also goes into like wanting to kind of take some of my own advice around like what I dream into, like with the people that I collaborate with, like what would in this bioregional context where we actually could have intimacy and a sense of belonging within a scope that may be a watershed space, like and watershed may not be the right way for every land place, but that there's I was recently with Akumu Ramsey Tom, and he was talking about the Native Hawaiian system of stewardship, and I was like, oh, so from the mountain to the ocean, and is it divided by the gulches? And like my Western mind wanted to be like, okay, show me how that works, and he was like, no, it's embedded in a system of relationships, and those relationships are known by the people because the people are in relationship with all of the beings. And so I feel like I am excited and honored to be part of the hacking of the system and the frontline solutions that we can come up with right now. And I also feel like it's so important to continue to pull away from that and actually directly be in relationship and regard our homes as places that we are responsible for. And then finding our way into right relationship. And so I hope that's okay. I kind of went into like into those two places.
Complicated places to exist between, but beautiful in their interaction and the relationship between them. Thank you, Cassandra. Marina?
I guess I would first start and affirm that the land does own itself. I guess if that's English is a hard language, because there's definitely words for this in Ungwahoaneha or Mohawk language, but the land does own itself. It's how do we conceptualize how we actually effectuate that? And most of the time that will mean challenging our local counties. It means challenging taxation. It means challenging these micro bureaucratic systems that reinforce the existence of the United States as this large settler colonial state. And we have to just be comfortable or lean into that discomfort, actually. And so how do we effectuate that, or how do we breathe that to life, can range into so many different directions. And yet again, I think it's based upon locality. But some small ways that this has been practiced, or you can I guess support that practice, is through hunting and fishing, Indigenous hunting and fishing rights, and the ability to practice that relationship on the land, despite property lines, is another way of challenging that. A lot of what allowed the parceling up and the division of Kanien'kehá:ka lands and Haudenosaunee lands at large depended on Quaker settlers coming in and teaching and enforcing husbandry and local agriculture at micro scales. And so this kind of reframed our our own relationship, indigenous relationship to the land, from people that were able to hunt and forage and have large lands of corn and plums and peach and agricultural stands all over that practiced traditional land burning, prescribed fire burning practices, to those that now sit within confined parcels of designated land, stems from practices in agriculture and the right to hunt and fish. And so challenging that is an example of challenging the idea of land not being able to own itself. It's rather a place in which you effectuate jurisdiction. So let's undo that jurisdiction. So yeah, I think it's a space that we have to lean into discomfort, our own discomfort in, and turn to understandings and dreaming outside of U.S. and Canadian governments, and challenging our own settler ontologies, myself included, within that space. So yeah, that's what I have to offer, I guess.
And now, as we wrap up the night, before we turn over to the questions from the audience, and for the audience, this is now is the time. If you haven't written them yet, to write your questions. I'm going to turn back to the beginning of our conversation, speaking about land and what land means to you all personally. And now I'm going to ask you all not to speak to the humans in the room, but to speak to the land where you are. And with that as your guide, one statement about summarizing everything you learned tonight, but also everything you feel deep inside. What do you want to say to land right now? I'm going to turn the mic over to Cassandra first. What do you want to say to land right now?
I want to say to land just such deep gratitude for life and for the incredible resilience and capacity to just keep on growing, and just really calling on the humans, all of us, to really come into that way, that kinship, to feel connected and belonging to the incredible sacredness of land.
Thank you. Marina?
This is one of those moments where I wish I could quit school so that I could full-time be learning my language, because I know that's the language it wants to be spoken to. We're going to continue fighting. We're going to continue working. We're going to continue liberating. And we're going to continue coming home. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to you both for this conversation with all of the people that are here in the call tonight, all the humans that are watching, and of course, the more than humans that are listening. And with this in mind, I am going to turn over to the people who are listening and their questions. Again, if you have any questions, now is the time to ask. We've had more than questions, a beautiful conversation that's been happening in the chat. So I'm going to just, 1 second, dive to the very beginning. There was a question, when we talk of stewardship, do we mean all of nature or only the commons, resources we use? So that was then answered by Ben Price, who said, when we ask who should be a steward of the land with responsibility, authority to protect the other, the more than human members of the community, why should it not be the community, tribe, land, etc., who the more than human members of the who are the more than human members of the natural community? In other words, rather than giving power over to legal rights of nature to governments or institutions, by recognizing a full-time residence as natural parts of the living community with inherent relationships with it and as it, have we identified the stewards? So it's more of a conversation there, but I don't know if any of you would like to add into any of that. And if not, we can turn over to the next question.
I think there was a couple of threads in there, but I did want to offer something up as potentially a way of navigating that space. In the 1100s, 1200s, it's estimated that's when the One Dish with One Spoon Treaty was made. With Great Lakes Indigenous communities, and sometimes that's referred to as like a treaty regarding the commons. But I find that wampum, that agreement, fascinating, and really profound, because it demonstrates a way that we cannot effectuate exclusionary title to the land in those spaces, but it does state that we have the ability to hunt, to fish, to roam those spaces, to even dwell on those spaces. But you cannot isolate title, and you cannot discriminate who moves throughout those spaces, and that's all along the Great Lakes region and up throughout the St. Lawrence Valley area. And that was then reaffirmed by at the Treaty of Montreal, Treaty of Peace, in 1701, that wampum was referenced. So it's still a breathing and living treaty. We simply have to find modes of effectuating that. And so I think when these questions talk about commons versus nature, it's I think it's more of a we're struggling with semantics. We're struggling with the English language, and that's okay. And we will simply make up new words or find other words or explain ourselves better. But what we do need to figure out is practice. How do we practice that? And so, yeah, I just wanted to offer that up.
There's another question. I'm first gonna so many beautiful comments. I'm gonna dive mostly to the questions because we're coming to the end of our time now. Let's see if there's a question for. So a question from Michelle Holman. While big corporate bad actors continue to legally own and destroy nature with impunity, don't local communities have to work to challenge and replace unjust law that protects the destruction with unjust law, with law? Okay. Have to work to challenge and replace unjust law that protects the destruction with just law that protects the planet and her creatures. So I'm going to I'll turn that over to Cassandra, or whoever wants to answer.
I feel like it's a Marina question.
Yeah, I think it's a both of us question. But I do think I think that there's a range of tools that can be used, and they can range from reformist to revolutionist to revoltist to anarchist, and I'd say creating just laws to replace unjust laws in an unjust system is on the reformist end of things, which is I think a practice that can be very can be used to do like quicker results, but also sometimes you will find that they undo themselves in the long run. We're finding this kind of with a lot of regulatory agencies. Regulatory agencies were kind of created, like the Department of Environmental Conservation, with a lot of their pollution discharge permitting. That was like a reformist strategy done by local communities, pushed in efforts by local communities in order to ensure the protection of like waterways in New York. But then what counters that is lobbyist group efforts. What counters that is the undermining of the permitting system using the courts and overwhelming that bureaucratic entity so that industries can continue to pollute. I think reformist practices can sometimes exhaust. I think that trying to create just laws and coming up against entities that never want those just laws to begin with can be very exhausting. But so are most, forms of action. And so I think that that's a mode that we can go down, and I think it's a necessary avenue that we go down. But at the same time, I think we need to focus on a multitude of ways and practices of addressing bad actors. I think direct action needs to also be paired with the reformist strategies, for example. So I think a confluence of these things are what create actionable change.
Mm. Mm. I really like where you went with that in terms of that there's multiple strategies, because that blocking and protecting strategy can be so exhausting. And so there's different maybe constitutions of people, different capacities, different life stages, inclinations that might lead us into our communities doing different aspects of the work. And I think it's and so I think it's important to kind of challenge ourselves too, because I don't know, my inclination has often been to be creating the alternative and be supporting those who are creating the alternative, and sending funding to those who are doing the blocking action. So like there's different ways that we might participate in those different actions. I think it was Joanna Macy that kind of broke it down, like there's the, I would love to kind of compare that with what the analysis that you just brought, Marina, in terms of maybe another time, the reformist and the different strategies of, I think, she really spoke to hospicing a dying system, like helping it die, and then blocking it from hurting life as much as possible, while at the same time nurturing the growth of the conditions that we actually that are life supporting. And so that there's multiple strategies, and there's might be different ways that we participate in each of those.
Yeah, I want to offer in the chat a resource for folks. This was done by Tiga Brain and a couple others. It shows the carbon offset through direct action based on different works that different direct action groups have done. And so if we look at these moments of direct action and these carbon offsets, and then we think about reformist strategies, for example, and how do we do like carbon restriction laws, I think there's an interesting dialogue that is happening here, that we can spend decades trying to ensure that industries follow laws or we can stop them. And I think both need to happen simultaneously. Back to what like Cassandra was saying, but I wanted to offer that as like a piece that folks can go to and check out.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. And I thank you for that link, Marina. And I just want to say that the people in the chat are echoing a lot of these thoughts, a lot of these dualities and modern dualities that we've been navigating with throughout this conversation today. People that have been describing where they feel and what they stand in this place and time. And especially thinking about that if the laws are not working, if things are not working, do we need to create new systems? And how do we navigate personally our relationship with the systems that we currently have? And I'm just going to turn over to one question specifically that is for Marina. And it was asked in the very beginning, and I'm finding it right now. And it's from Lee to you, Marina. What about colonialist notions of public property, such as the colonialist framing of US rivers as free public property to all, which really means free to all commerce, i.e. the very condition of a river as an navigable body for any extractive or human commercial industrial purpose? How do we deal with this problem built into the settler legal system, water with origins in the Magna Carta? Rights to rivers seems impossible to break through that, even harder than free private land. And I can read any of those sections again. It's lots of complicated ideas.
Yeah, and I think Cassandra can also speak to this too. To I guess this it almost I feel like the question doesn't self-answer, but it points to things that ask itself the same question, if that makes sense. And I think it's an excellent question. I think that ideas of public spaces, I guess the question that I have is, I know they're referencing waters in that particular question, but are they referencing like trying to find an equivalent to land, i.e. like parks, like federal or state parks? I wasn't quite sure if it wanted a reflection back to the land itself. I don't know if they're still here. I'm trying to find the comment so I can reread it.
I can read it again, but no.
Okay, I found it. Notions of public properties. Yeah. So again, this we see this especially with the St. Lawrence, I would say. The St. Lawrence isn't seen as it's like joint an international waterway in terms of it's co-managed by the US and Canadian government. And so all of the seaway efforts, for example, were done with the permission and sanctioning of the US and Canadian governing bodies. And they did that mainly to promote commerce and navigation. So they dredged and flooded lands and islands and dispossessed indigenous peoples, completely altered the landscape of the St. Lawrence in order to make it a navigable waterway. And so how do we defy or counter or speak for the rights of the river? What we see is that that's usually difficult to do within court frameworks. So when, for example, the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, which is the elective Canadian governing body of Akwesasne, took the seaway to court, what you essentially get is a settlement. And that settlement doesn't necessarily give you rights of management. What that did was provide compensation. And so now you're getting compensation as which is, you know, necessary, I guess, sometimes, but you're receiving compensation as an exchange of damages. And so rather than going through these court systems as a way of, I guess, challenging and trying to present the rights of the river, what are other avenues in which we're going to do or exert that effort? The river's liberty to self, the river's liberty to clean itself, its right to repair itself. And that usually has to do with undoing the very damage that caused it. So the deconstruction of the dams, which, you know, New York Power Authority and Ontario Power Generation would very much not like to see. But I think that should be the pinnacle and the goal that we always place at the very front of what we're doing, is undoing the root cause of the environmental injustice. What is the source of the pipeline in sometimes quite literal ways? So yeah, those are thoughts that I guess I had on these comments. Sorry, Lee, if I didn't answer it properly.
Well, so we have so many amazing questions and we're out of time. So if people still want to ask the questions and want to have responses from these amazing humans we have in the virtual room with us tonight, you can always email us. You can always email Talking Rivers and we'll pass on the questions to the panelists. But for now, we're gonna end up the night. And just remind you all that this is the first of a series of 3 events that we are all in this together symposium. The second one is taking place on March 19th, and it's going to be the spirits of nature, respecting the ancestral guardians of the natural world. And you'll find more information about those events in a follow-up email we'll be sending to you all, with as well as the recording of the event tonight. So if there's any last words that Marina or Cassandra want to share, you're very much welcome to. But if not, hope you all have an amazing and relaxing evening.
Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation, and Marina, I'm so glad to have met you, and I look forward to meeting you again.
Yes, no, thank you to you, Cassandra. Keep up the awesome work. All of you keep up the awesome work. There's some incredible revolutionaries in the comments. Shout out to Talking Rivers for placing these conversations at the forefront. We'll continue to support each other. Nyawa.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.